Welcome back to The Place of Places, a chapter-by-chapter analysis of William Saroyan's 1972 memoir, Places Where I've Done Time. Today, we reunite the family via the Southern Pacific train, Oakland to Fresno, 1915. The Saroyan kids had been living at the Fred Finch orphanage for 4 or 5 years, beginning in 1911, after their father Arminok died. Their mother, Takui, was working as a housekeeper in San Francisco during those years, trying to make good money and visiting her children across the bay in Oakland on weekends. In Sons Come and Go, Mothers Hang In Forever, he tells us that he had mistakenly believed he was at the orphanage for 4 years, but it was actually 5, from 1911 to 1916. That was written after Places Where I've Done Time, which is why we have this chapter, with the Saroyan kids leaving in 1915. In fact, in 1915, Willie went with a group of orphanage kids and a caretaker to the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco, a testament to the city recovering after its devastating 1906 earthquake. That event was visually very impactful for him, and he goes into more depth about it in chapter 53 of this book. Saroyan's memory about his Oakland years was fuzzy, and it took him a long time to piece the puzzle of those years back together, as he was young and traumatized. But memory is a fluid thing, oftentimes as much fictionalized as real, as we fill in the blanks with other assumptions we have made as adults. In Saroyan's memoirs, we find many such inconsistencies, but they form a whole, nevertheless, as certain themes pop up again and again. He wrote about his life so much that he created a narrative that memory served rather than constructed. Little Willie peers out of the train window, watching Oakland shrink into the distance. He considers, "When the train began to go, I turned around. Was it to see if they were following us and would try to make us go back? Or was it simply to say goodbye and good riddance? Or was it perhaps to say, what years passed there?" He tells us that his oldest sibling, Cosette, age 16, had gotten into an argument with the orphanage staff, and that cruel words had been spoken about the Saroyans and about Armenians in general. It was a nasty way to leave a place like that. For better or worse, it had been home for years. These 5 years in the life of Willie, age 8, meant that he no longer remembered his father or living in Fresno at all. However, he knew that returning to family was going to be better than the orphanage. Indeed, he would become Fresno's favorite son. In Short Drive, Sweet Chariot, he wrote of the orphanage, "Of course I was living, but I was waiting to live at home. To begin with, to get out of that place, the Fred Finch orphanage in Oakland, as you know, to live with my father, and as you may also know, he was dead. I was also waiting for my mother to come over to Oakland from San Francisco and take me home. I was also waiting for Christmas, which is inevitable in the children of the Western world." Nona Balakian writes in The World of William Saroyan, "It is psychologically viable that the unknown is unsettling, indeed often frightening, especially for the innocent and inexperienced. But by leaving the field open to possibility, the unknown can also be a source of challenge. Not knowing what the future holds in any specific sense can accelerate an imagination already lively, unleashing its penchant for creativity. But the response will be positive only if there exists a center from which self-identity can emerge." She explains that for William, early on, this initial center was his nuclear family. And in many of Saroyan's memoirs, he describes the relief that he had his siblings with him at the orphanage, and that he did still have his mother, while most of the other children had no one with them. These chaotic early years were grounded by the presence of his nuclear family, so that when he did finally get back to Fresno, the extended family presented a security to him that he didn't have before, and which allowed his mind to flourish without any more fear. The extended family in Fresno helped set up Takui and her children back in Fresno, where her mother and siblings lived. It was Dikran Bagdasarian, husband of Berkin Saroyan, Takui's sister, who picked up the kids at the Southern Pacific Depot in Fresno. This is the Dikran featured in the story The Pomegranate Trees, from My Name is Aram. In that story, he did all he could to grow pomegranate trees in the desert, to no avail. This is also the same Dikran who was father to Ross Bagdasarian, future Alvin and the Chipmunks impresario. William and Henry had to relearn the Armenian language, as most of their relatives spoke it at home. Cosette and Zabel were old enough to recall it, and often spoke it with their mother on visits in Oakland. Reuniting with the extended family had an element of foreignness to it, to William and Henry. Although these people welcomed them and looked like them, they had lived as fully assimilated Americans in the orphanage. However, it didn't take long for them to pick up the language, embrace the food again, and feel like they belonged in a community again. A little bit about the train at that time. The Southern Pacific was a huge transcontinental line, founded in the 1800s, and at times run by Charles Crocker, Leland Stanford, and Collis Huntington, three of the Big Four railroad tycoons. The Southern Pacific looms large in California literature, moving people and goods up and down the state, and connecting Los Angeles and San Diego in the south to the Central Valley, San Francisco, and Sacramento in the north. In 1912, the 16th Street Depot opened in Oakland, rerouting most of its trains from 7th Street, which was used by the Central Pacific. The station sustained too much damage in the Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989 and has been closed since. The 16th Street Depot was large and would have been impressive to Willie. He probably took the San Joaquin Flyer, which sent him roughly over modern-day Highway 4 and then to the cusp of the Central Valley in Tracy, California, roughly following modern-day Highway 99 down to Fresno. The ride would have taken most of a day, finally ending at the Santa Fe station in Fresno, and then on to his uncle's house in Malaga by car, where his mother was waiting for them. I went to sleep perhaps the happiest I have ever been, but also the most deeply aware of the sorrow at the center of everything, of everybody and everything. This chapter presents the move from Oakland back to Fresno as a rebirth for Saroyan, and a sort of immigration in small scale, as the kids drastically shift cultures, surroundings, and even languages. This internalized feeling of sorrow has been associated with generations of people living in diaspora, and the Fred French orphanage was a place he looked back on with mixed feelings, alternatingly angry and proud of it. He respected the lessons learned there and the hard shell it helped him develop, but it was a lonely place without much warmth. It was home and it was a prison, and he and others would attempt to unpack its significance for decades to come. Lee Lawrence's biography of Saroyan illustrates this trip in terms of the shocking geographical changes experienced by the kids. For years, they lived by the cool coastal breeze of the bay in the Oakland Hills, and in a matter of hours they were transported to the dry, hot semi-desert of the Central Valley. Still, we know that William would come to love that climate and that place, with its desert plants and fruit trees planted in thoroughly irrigated land. When he moved back to Fresno as an adult, he grew his own trees on his land, including an orange tree, and this is a fruit that makes symbolic appearances throughout his stories. There are a few, the grape, the apricot, the pomegranate, the orange, that make special appearances in his writing. In this chapter, he unpeels an orange on the train. I woke up soon and was offered an orange, which I peeled and ate. This seems to be something that must happen during train travel. In the human comedy, there's a vignette of a father and his son at the father's grocery market. The boy bit into the peel of the orange, then began to finish the job of peeling with his fingers, working slowly but efficiently at first, but after a moment accelerating his effort with such an intensity that even the father began to feel as surely the sun felt, that beneath the peeling of this growth of tree would be not simply an orange, but the heart's final happiness. The boy placed the peelings of the orange on the counter in front of his father, broke the orange in half, peeled off one section, put it in his mouth, chewed, and swallowed. But alas, no, it was truly an orange, but it was truly not the heart's final happiness. The son waited a moment, then put the rest of the orange in front of his father. Again the father took up the unfinished work and silently began trying to finish it. But soon the limit was reached, and a little less than half of the orange went into the garbage can. The orange has found its way into literature as a symbol of nature, especially in time periods of industrialization and mechanization. Its round shape and juicy innards have been associated with success, good fortune, fertility, and strength. And Saroyan also seems to be using it as a metaphor for the sun, too. As he travels to the land of constant sun in the Central Valley, he begins by eating this sun-shaped fruit, disassembling it so that he is in control of it. His train trips, too, were presented to readers as movement forward, whether it was to Fresno, New York, or to Soviet Armenia, all of them representing personal growth and movement towards a more complete future. Saroyan isn't considered a highly symbolic author, but these details came to him and always seemed to fit his tone just right. This chapter, though brief and ephemeral, represents a major shift in Saroyan's life, a key that unlocked the door to his future success as a writer and as a proud Armenian. Let's put this on the Saroyan map and move on.